Today we're going to take another look at OctoDash and touchscreens that you can use on your Raspberry Pi to control OctoPrint. Hello everybody, Chris here, and we have taken a look at OctoDash before. In that last video we did get it installed and check out all of its features, and it worked pretty well. But there's been a lot of updates to OctoDash since then that make it even easier to use. And in that video, I told you about one of our community members named Jeff that was taking over some of the development for OctoScreen. Well, Jeff has came up with a procedure to make it easier to use your 480 by 320 GPIO screen on any Raspberry Pi OctoPrint config. That includes OctoDash and OctoScreen. So I definitely wanted to run through that procedure with you, because there might be a lot of folks that have one of these screens that were never able to get it working, and this should solve a lot of those problems. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to walk through all those steps, and I'll just show you the new config of OctoDash and all the new features and how much easier it is to use. So let's get going by taking a look at what Jeff has done for this project. So here's a look at the page that Jeff put together over on the OctoScreen GitHub page. It has all the steps and why you have to do them right here. And this is the guide we're going to be using. I have tried this several times on several GPIO screens, and it has worked so far. No issues. It is important to note that he's using these drivers. They're commonly called LCD show. A lot of these screens that are GPIO screens, a lot of them are all the same, no matter what brand they are. And these LCD show drivers usually will have one that works for most of these screens. So when you install this package, it's going to give you all kinds of different sizes and types of screens. There should be one that should work for you. I am going to be using the default one for my 3.5. That's the most common Raspberry Pi screen, but there's a lot more in there. Just look around. We'll take a look at that when we get into SSH. I will leave a link in the description to this GitHub so you can check it out. Now remember, Jeff is working with OctoScreen, so that's what he installs on this page. I like to use OctoDash. I think it's a little cleaner, but that's the only part we're really going to change up, is this stuff down in here. But you'll see that as we walk through the install. And this is the screen we're going to be working with today. It's a very generic 3.5-inch TFT touchscreen. Got it off of Amazon for around $20. And I'm using a Raspberry Pi 3B+. This should work exactly the same on the Raspberry Pi 4. I just have a lot more 3s than I do 4s. Remember, you need the correct power for your Raspberry Pi, and you're going to need an SD card. For this video, I do assume you have your SD card built with an OctoPi image already. It's pretty straightforward, easy to do. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. The screen install is very simple. Usually the leading edge just lines up with the edge of these pins. The pins on this side are the power and the ground for this setup. I do highly recommend that you find a case for this, because you don't want this screen moving around at all when you're trying to use it. That can cause some issues if it causes those pins to get unset. But we'll talk more about cases. I do actually have one printing right now. We'll talk more about that a little later in the video. Let's go ahead and get it installed and make sure everything's working before we get it in there. So we are going to use PuTTY for SSH today. I know a lot of people like to use something else. This is just what I like to use. You can use the IP of your Raspberry Pi install. If you only have one, or if you've named it, you can use octopi.local, that's the default one, or whichever one that you have created. Give octopi.local a try first, then you're going to have to try your IP. So we'll just log in. Default is Pi, password is Raspberry. And I do highly recommend that you start with a fresh install of OctoPrint for this. Use that OctoPi image, that's the easiest way to get it done. Even if you've used plugins or it's a relatively new install, I'd start from scratch. You're going to have the best luck with something that hasn't been messed with at all. Feel free to go through the wizard, set up your ID, all that good stuff, but don't do anything else. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that Raspbian is up to date. So sudo apt update. You will need your root password, which is also Raspberry. That updates all the repositories, and then you can update all the packages. sudo apt upgrade. This just makes sure that everything is up to date and ready to go. We'll be using the newest versions of all the applications in Raspbian. If you have any errors during this process where it says some packages are broken, you always want to do a sudo apt install -f. That should fix any of the dependency problems that you have. Then go ahead and go back and do your apt upgrade, and it should work after that. That's a pretty common issue. So now we're going to do a git to grab our LCD show drivers. I will leave a link to all the commands that I used as well as that GitHub page so you can just copy them, but we're going to do a git clone to that GitHub where those LCD drivers are. That'll download them to your Raspberry Pi. Then we're going to do a chmod. This changes permissions. We're going to do a -r so that it gets everything in the whole directory. We're going to change it to 755. That's the amount of permissions that it gets. lcd-show. That's the directory we just downloaded that git package to. And then we're going to change directory into that lcd-show. We can take a look in there with an ls. And we are going to be using this LCD35 driver. This one right here. And because it's in green, it should have the proper permissions. But just in case it doesn't, you can do a chmod +x. That execute lcd35-show. Now it's important to note, these might not support your display, but it does support a lot of different screens. You can see all of them listed here. 7-inch, 5-inch, 4-inch. Give these a try if you can't figure out the drivers you have for your screen. It might be the same. And I want you to notice what the screen is going to look like before you get anything installed. Most of the time it's just going to be white. And that's how we are right now. We haven't been configured yet. We haven't loaded the driver. But now we're going to go ahead and run that script. Do sudo /lcd35-show. This is going to run through the driver install, and it will reboot the Pi at the end. During the install, it is going to install some packages. Just go ahead and tell it yes. So we got to the end of the driver install. There were a few warnings. You can usually ignore those, but it did close SSH because it's rebooting the Pi. Back to the Pi. You know the driver's working if now you can see the log SSH on the screen. And this is a great time to mention how the screen rotation works. You'll see more of this as we get through the config, but by default, the screen is going to be with your USB on the right, your power and HDMI down. So mine is currently 180. This is how it will look by default. And you can see we're just at the SSH login screen. So that's good. We know the driver's working. Back to SSH, we're going to log back in. So if you wanted to use a case that was the opposite, where it had the HDMI and the power on top, you could just run that driver again. So let's just go ahead and do it. We'll go into cd lcd-show, take a look again. We're going to use that same driver command, sudo /lcd35-show, but you can put a 180 right here, and that will flip it upside down. So let's just run it and take a look. Now you can see the screen is actually flipped over. Just a trick if you want to change the orientation. But I'm going to change mine back for now. So we're logged back in, we have the screen driver installed and the screen position the way we want. Next thing we need to do is edit some config files in the bootconfig.txt. So we're just going to do sudo nano /boot /config.txt. In here we want to adjust the HDMI setting to be compatible with the resolution that we're going to need. The applications like to use 800 by 533, where the screens are only 480 by 320. So down here on HDMI_CVT, where it says 480, we're going to make that 800, and 320, we're going to make that 533. We're going to control X, Y, and enter to save, and we're going to go ahead and reboot. Sudo reboot. Now we're going to be doing a lot of reboots, pretty much after every install, to check things out along the way. You probably don't have to do all these, but it is a good idea to go ahead and kick it over every time you install new applications or utilities, just to make sure everything is working as expected. And then the next thing you install after that, those utilities will be there for sure. They've already been installed and verified after that reboot. So do as many reboots as you wish. I'm going to do a lot during this video. So we're going to log back in. Next thing we're going to do is install all of the X11 utilities. So we're doing libgtk3o, xserver, xorg, xinit, x11 server utils. You install everything with a sudo apt-get install, or apt install. And remember, I said just a fresh install of Octoprint. You can't have the desktop environment installed if you're trying to run one of these, because that X11 is going to be a conflict with the two. So you need just plain vanilla Octopi image and Octoprint install for this to work correctly. So we'll go ahead and let these install. It's going to give you a big list of packages it's going to install. Just go ahead and give it a yes. And this will take a moment. The first round is done. You can probably guess. I'm going to reboot it. Sudo reboot. We will log back in. We're logged back in. Now we can run our next set of our commands. This time it's another set of utilities: build essential, xorg dev, xutility dev, and x11 proto dri2 dev. A lot of these are dev utilities that you probably don't need, but it's good to have them just in case you need to make some configuration changes that require this utility. This is the set that Jeff recommends. It's always worked for me, so that's what I'm going with. So let's go ahead and install. You can see this set of utilities only takes 25 meg, so it's not that big of a deal. A lot of these you probably already have, so it's not really using up that much disk space. Let's go ahead and let it do it. Those have been installed, and yes, sudo reboot. We are logged back in, and one more round of utilities. This time we're doing libLTDL dev, libtool, automig, which we will use, libdrm-dev. Again, probably not a lot of these are necessary. We're going to install them anyway because it seems to work. And another reboot. And we're back in. Now we're going to download and install another type of video driver. It's a driver that's just a little bit more optimized than the one we used previously. And you do need to do both, the initial one and this one. So we're going to do the download with git clone over to GitHub, xf86-video-fbturbo.git. Now we'll change directory into the directory that was made during that download. xf86-video-fbturbo. We're going to do an auto reconfig, conf-vi. This just gets everything ready to be configured. Then we're going to run the configure script ./configure. Then we're going to run it with a prefix --prefix equals /usr. When the configure is complete, we can just run a make. You'll probably see some warnings during this process. There's no need to worry. Those should be fine. Then we're going to run a make install. Sudo make space install. Now that the make install is complete, we're going to copy our xorg.config into our etc x11 config. So sudo cp xorg.conf into /etc /X11 /xorg.conf. Now at this point, the Raspberry Pi should be ready to go. I am going to go ahead and reboot it one more time before we do our install. And if you take a look at the GitHub page that Jeff has created, he's put the steps in here to install OctoScreen. You can go ahead and do that if you prefer. I do like OctoDash a little bit better. But then he continues on to do some of the configuration items down here below, changing the resolution so that it's going to work. OctoDash, you shouldn't have to do these steps. So we're going to go into the OctoDash install now. You can just search for GitHub OctoDash, and all of the install directions are right here on the main page. Now, as I said before, there's been a lot of updates to OctoDash. It's much easier to use than that last video. We don't need to do any of that VNC stuff. We don't need a keyboard or anything like that. It does most of it for you. So we're just going to take this whole line right here. We'll copy it. We'll log back in after that last reboot. And we'll just paste it right here. Hit enter. We do need our sudo password one more time. And this is going to go through the complete OctoDash install. During the install, it's going to ask you a couple of questions. You can just go through the menu, spacebar selects it, then hit enter when you want to finalize it. The first one is which plugins would you like to install during this install. You can pick whichever ones you want. You can always come back and install them later. But all these do something just a little bit different on the OctoDash screen. You do have to have display layer progress. So we'll just hit space on that one. And just for fun, let's do Prusa Slicer thumbnails, just to give it a couple of things to install. And we'll hit enter. Plugins have been installed. There are a few more questions. Should I set up OctoDash to automatically start on boot? I do want OctoDash to come up every time. So we'll just hit space. You can't see yes on some of these terminals, but if you go down, you'll see yes, because now we're on no. It's kind of flaky. Just keep it on the top one, hit space. We'll continue on. You can see it says yes right in there. Next question, should I set up an update script? This will allow the OctoDash package to install without using sudo or root. If you're concerned about security, installing things on your Raspberry Pi, say no, but it's much easier if you just say yes and let it do it. So I'm going to say yes. And then, should I reboot the Pi now? We're going to go ahead and let it reboot one more time. With any luck, it's going to come up on OctoDash. So let's hit space. We're in SSH while we're booting up. And here comes OctoDash. Now we're ready to walk through the steps on the screen to get it installed. Before we do that, let's go ahead and take a look at the case that we're going to use and get it put in there so it's a little more comfortable to use. I'm going with this case from Florin Tobler over here on Thingiverse. Link in the description. It's a nice clean design. There are a few things I'd like to tweak about it, but I'll probably do that after this video, and I'll post the link to the remix as well as this original one. The case fits nice together. I use PETG because it has a little better snap to it. And also, it comes with a shim right here, so it levels out your screen a little bit. And that's going to actually help a lot with the consistency when it's laying on this USB and Ethernet jack. So I'm going to restart my session and log back in just so that I can shut it down gracefully. You can also do this from the Octoprint GUI just with the power button if you wish. But if you want to do it in here, just do sudo shutdown -H for halt. This will schedule a shutdown in 1 minute. You can also enter a time parameter if you wish. It should go to the SSH section and then go back to the white screen. After the green activity light and everything's not blinking anymore, it's probably safe to go ahead and power it down. Here's our case. Raspberry Pi fits in just like this. You can use some M3 by 6mm screws to screw it down. It just threads into the plastic. It fits nice and snug. Really the main tweak that I want to make is maybe make some mount holes. I'll make this a little thicker. Make some mount holes back here so I can use some wood screws to tie it down to my printer shelf, because that's where it's going to spend most of its time. I just put a couple of screws in to make sure it's secure. And then with your shim, that's made to take up this gap right here. And the easiest way to install this is to just glue it on the back of the screen with some semi-temporary glue. Just use a little bit of hot glue to keep it in place. You don't want it to slide around. but that shouldn't hurt your screen at all. Just make sure it's nice and lined up so you know where to put your glue. We'll just put it right towards the edge and in the center. They've done a good job spacing this out, making this part the correct length. And then we can just put our screen back on. And that's going to make it much more level and consistent when you're using it. A lot of times these can move around a bit, and if those GPIO pins move at all, it's going to cause issues. And this bezel goes on and has a really nice snap fit. And there we go. There are a couple of different designs on that Thingiverse page. Just try a few, see which one works for your screen. But as always, not every screen is going to be exactly the same. So now our case is on, we've powered back up, we've booted, now we're on the welcome screen, we're ready to configure OctoDash. But there's one more thing and a restart that I want to check before we configure this. So let's jump back to the web GUI on the browser. And OctoDash is going to need your API key to be able to communicate from Linux over to Octoprint. And you have to allow that to happen. So go into Settings up here, go to API, and make sure this CORS box is checked. Cross-origin resource sharing. That way they can talk back and forth. Go ahead and hit Save, and then just for good measure, come up here to Power and hit Reboot System. Now with that enabled, we've rebooted, we're back at the welcome screen. So now we can go ahead and configure it. We'll hit Next. And I am going to use this mechanical pencil as a stylus for this video, and it's not because the touch doesn't work so well. It actually works okay. I just didn't want to get fingerprints on it for the purpose of this video. Here's one of the coolest features about the new OctoDash in my opinion. You don't just have to use the one that's locally installed on this Raspberry Pi, the Octo Local. It will notice all of the Octoprint instances you have on your network, and it'll try to grab those as well. So you could as easily control one of those from this Raspberry Pi as you could the Octoprint that lives on this one, which is a really cool feature. We're just going to do the local one for now, but that is an option if you want to do that. So we'll hit the top one here, that's usually the local. And then here's why you need that CORS setting. OctoDash is going to send a request over to Octoprint to get its API key. Then you have to go back to the Octoprint web GUI and OK that. So we'll just hit this to send a request, and you'll get a pop-up. It says login request sent. Now you should see this access request from OctoDash over here, and just hit allow. Now if you don't see that, go ahead and reboot everything one more time. Also check, make sure that you selected the correct Octopi instance on your OctoDash screen, and that you don't have more than one octopi.local on your network. Because it could be trying to call that DNS on a different Pi and you don't even know it. So check all of those things if you don't get it. Back to OctoDash. We're ready to set up some of the printer attributes. These can all be set in Octoprint. These are the same settings that you set up in your profiles, so I'm not going to bother typing them in here. We'll just hit Next. Same thing with these feed links for the unload buttons on OctoDash. You can set those in the settings in OctoDash. No big deal. We'll hit Next. And here's all the plugins that you can use. We only installed the Prusa Slicer and the display layer progress. You have to have that one, that was mandatory. But we'll just hit Next. We'll take the defaults. You can pick whichever ones you want. And then we're all done. And when you hit done, if you don't have a printer connected, it's going to go to sleep. So now we can cable up USB to our Raspberry Pi, pick whichever printer we want, and it should wake up. So we've got OctoDash up, I got log plugged in USB. Let's go ahead and power up log. Let's go back to the web GUI and make sure it connected. We'll just select our USB port and our baud rate, and then you can do this auto connect so it connects to OctoDash every time so you don't have to do this. You can save connection settings as well. We'll go ahead and connect. Then we should be able to tap the screen. It'll start connecting, and our printer is awake. We're ready to start controlling it. I don't have any files on this config, but we can just run through some of the controls if you want. It works pretty much exactly the same in the last video, of course. Front, left, up. You've got your stop key, where you can preheat. These are the defaults that are in Octoprint. We can go up here to settings, And here's where you can adjust a lot of things about OctoDash. You have general, stuff about your printer, OctoDash. You can turn the screen off while it's sleeping. That is kind of handy. Whole lots of different stuff in here. And that's pretty much all there is to it. You're ready to start using OctoDash. And there it is. Our troubleshooting OctoDash install is complete. Now remember, most people are going to be able to use the screen with OctoScreen and OctoDash just fine. Jeff put these procedures together because a lot of people do struggle with that 480 by 320 screen. So if you're one of those folks and you never got OctoDash or OctoScreen working, go back and give this procedure a try. Also, it's important to remember that Jeff has done a lot of development on OctoScreen. So if you like OctoDash now or you liked OctoScreen, both have a lot of great updates. So give them another look, see which one you like best, and try them both out. Hopefully you found this helpful. That's it for today, and I'll see you really soon on the next one.